Once upon a time, long before central heating, microwaves, or weather apps, people lived in small villages scattered across the frost-covered lands of medieval Europe. The year was sometime between the 9th and 14th century, give or take a plague or two. And winters, well, winters were brutal. Picture this. You live in a tiny wooden hut, the roof is thatch, and the walls are drafty. If you're lucky, you have a fire burning. If you're really lucky, the smoke from the fire goes up the chimney instead of into your eyes. Most peasants didn't have chimneys, just holes in the roof. Cozy, right? Outside, the world is a muddy mess. Forget pretty snow-covered villages. In many parts of medieval Europe, winter was more rain than snow. Roads turned into rivers of brown slush, and your boots, if you owned any, were soaked within minutes. Inside, it wasn't much better. There's no insulation, and the fire only heats about 3 feet in any direction. So, families would huddle together, wrapped in wool and old cloaks. The livestock? They might be inside with you. Yes, cows, pigs, maybe a few chickens, all sharing your space and your smell. It kept the place a little warmer, though not exactly fresher. Food was scarce. Most crops were harvested in late summer and early autumn, which meant by winter, you were eating what you'd stored, dried beans, old root vegetables, and lots of porridge.
Meat? Rare.
Unless you were noble, or your pig froze to death, in which case, stew night.
Yum.
And don't forget illness. Winter brought colds, flu, and worse. There were no antibiotics, no hand sanitizer, and barely any doctors. If someone got sick, the best remedies included herbal teas, prayers, and maybe a bleeding or two if the local physician felt fancy. For nobles, life was only slightly better. Castles were cold stone boxes. Tapestries helped, but they didn't stop the draft. The fireplaces were big, but so were the rooms. Lords and ladies layered up, wool, linen, for cloaks. Even the king went to bed, wearing a hat. And yet, somehow people endured. They sang songs, told stories, passed down old legends by the fire. Winter was hard, but it was also a time for reflection, quiet, and staying close to the people who mattered. Whether you were a humble peasant or a minor baron, the long, dark season reminded you that spring would return eventually. And so, as the wind howled outside and frost crept across the wooden shutters, you pulled the blanket up to your chin, stirred the pot of oat porridge once more, and dreamed of green fields, warm sun, and maybe, just maybe, a better harvest next year. A long and sleepy tale from a time before warm socks. The wind howled like a hungry wolf through the crooked wooden slats of the cottage wall. Outside, the forest groaned beneath the weight of a heavy frost. Trees stood like gaunt skeletons, their limbs outstretched, coated in ice. The sky above was a slate-gray lid, pressing down upon the earth. And nestled beneath this cold canopy, a village slept, or tried to. In a hut no bigger than a stable, a family stirred beneath coarse woolen blankets. The father, Willem, lay closest to the fire pit, a ring of blackened stones, where the embers now smoldered low. Beside him, his wife Annette curled around their youngest child, a boy of 6 winters named Tomkin. The 2 older children, Lise and Joran, lay side by side at the far end of the single straw-stuffed mattress, their feet tucked into one another's bellies for warmth. Above them, in the shadows of the loft, 2 chickens shifted softly on a beam, occasionally fluffing their feathers. A pig grunted from a corner where it slept in a crude pen made from broken furniture. The cottage smelled of wood smoke, damp wool, and old stew. But it was home. Windface Chapter 1. The Long Night. The first frost had come early this year, nipping the last of the turnip leaves and coating the well in a glassy sheen. By November, the roads were impassable, thick with mud, then rutted with ice. The village of Dunlow, which in summer buzzed with chatter and the clatter of carts, fell into quiet. The fields lay barren, their brown earth frozen stiff. Nothing grew. Nothing moved. Willem, once a freeman farmer, now toiled in the Lord's granary just to earn enough grain to keep his family fed. There were days he came home with nothing but a bruised apple and a lump of barley bread. And always Annette made do. She'd stretch a single cabbage into soup for 4. She'd dry dandelion roots and steep them in hot water for something that resembled tea. They weren't poor. Not really. Not in the way some families were, who had lost their land entirely. But in winter, even the better-off peasants were hungry. Everyone was cold. The village priest once said winter was God's way of humbling man, reminding him of the fragility of life. But Willem and most others just thought it was miserable. Fire Chapter 2. Smoke and Shadows. Most nights, there was no light in Dunlow. Only the faint orange glow from a few hearths and the pale shimmer of moonlight on snow. Torches were precious, made from cloth soaked in tallow or resin, and rarely wasted on walking about in the dark. People went to bed early, not for rest but to keep warm. Sleep was not always restful. The mattresses were sacks of hay, and lice were common guests. Children often awoke scratching. The fire had to be tended every few hours, lest it go out completely. If it did, someone would have to brave the freezing dark to find kindling again. Dreams were strange in the cold. Some said the frost spirits whispered to those who slept too deeply. Others said it was the fever from bad bread, rye infected with ergot. Whatever the cause, winter nights were filled with long, strange dreams of warmth that never came. Candle Chapter 3. Lord and serf alike. Atop the hill, in a small stone keep surrounded by a wooden palisade, Lord Harwin fared better, but not by much. His hall was lined with tapestries, thick wool rugs, and fur pelts from his hunts. But even here, in the heart of noble comfort, the air bit at the skin. Fires roared in iron grates, but the stone walls drank the heat greedily. Servants scurried from hearth to hearth, carrying embers and shovels, lighting candles, fetching firewood, and keeping the lord's boots dry. Meals were better, yes, roasted meats, dried fruits, casks of ale, but rationed all the same. If the keep ran out before thaw, even the lord's table would turn meager. Lord Harwin's daughter, Lady Ellen, spent her hours reading scrolls by firelight, wrapped in layers of wool. She dreamed of spring, of flowers and falconry. But her handmaid whispered warnings of bandits in the forest, desperate men with frostbitten fingers and bellies gone hollow with hunger. Even for the highborn, winter brought fear. Snowflake Chapter 4. The Cold Within. When it snowed, the village rejoiced, if only for a moment. Snow meant dry paths instead of sucking mud. It meant clean water, gathered fresh from the white blanket. It was beautiful in a way. The forest glistened like a realm of ice spirits. Children, when their bones weren't aching from hunger, shaped crude snowmen and threw clumps at one another before their hands grew too red and stiff. But the beauty never lasted. Soon came the cold that seeped into marrow. The days grew shorter. The sun, pale and distant, barely lifted above the treetops. Time slowed. People counted the days by candle stubs, by the rise and fall of the hearth smoke, by the slow, dwindling stores of oats and salted pork. Illness spread easily. A cough turned into fever. A fever turned. Part 2. Deep winter and the silent struggle. The weeks wore on. Midwinter came like a shadow, stretching across the land with a slow, relentless chill. The snow that once brought a flicker of beauty was now crusted with ice, hard as bone, sharp beneath bare feet. The wind no longer howled, it whispered. A low, constant moan across rooftops, through chinks in stone walls, under doorframes. It was the kind of cold that sank into the soul, hollowing it out. In Dunlow, the village barely stirred. Days passed without word from the outside. The road that led east, toward the river towns, was buried and frozen. The bridge was gone, washed away weeks ago by an early flood, and never rebuilt. Trade had stopped. News had stopped. Even the birds had stopped singing. Fog Chapter 6. Smoke and Silence. In the dead of January, Willem stood in the doorway of his hut, wrapped in a threadbare cloak lined with straw. He looked over the fields, white and motionless. Not even a deer's hoof-print broke the surface. His breath curled in the air like smoke from an extinguished candle. He knew what the silence meant.
The stores were nearly gone.
The beans had run out first. The root cellar, once full of turnips, carrots, and parsnips, now held only shriveled skins and soft onions. The salted pork had spoiled. The oat barrel echoed when struck. Inside, Annette stirred a pot over the fire. Only a handful of barley and bits of lichen boiled in water. She hummed a lullaby to mask her own hunger, rocking little Tonkin back and forth even though he no longer cried. He had grown too tired for tears. That evening, Joran spoke aloud what the others feared. "If spring does not come soon," he said, "we won't last." His sister Lee said nothing. She was staring into the fire, mouth slightly open, lips pale and chapped. She had begun to see things, flowers blooming on the floor, birds nesting in the rafters. The family didn't speak of it. Starvation had a way of dressing itself in visions. Pawprints, Chapter 7. Wolves at the Edge. Farther west, the forest had changed. Where once children dared to play near the trees, now no one approached. The wolves had returned. Thin, bold, desperate. A widow named Bera, who lived alone at the edge of the village, lost a goat to them in the night. All she found in the morning was a trail of blood and prints in the snow like curved daggers. No one came to help her rebuild the fence. No one had the strength. Fires were built taller now, not for warmth, but to frighten the beasts away. Still, the howling continued every night, closer, always closer. In the castle, Lord Harwin's steward sent hunters into the woods with crossbows and spears. Only half returned. They brought back little meat. Rabbits had burrowed deep. The deer had vanished, and the boars, those stubborn, dangerous beasts, were too strong for hungry men. One hunter, a boy of 17 named Edric, came back with 3 fingers missing and teeth marks on his shoulder. He said the wolves had circled them, not with fear, but cunning. They moved like soldiers, he claimed, led by one with a single red eye. The steward laughed, but Lady Ellen did not. "When men become monsters," she said softly to her handmaid, "the beasts will rise to meet them." Dove, Chapter 8. A Candle in the Dark. Yet even in the bleakest winter, a flame can survive. Father Osric, the village priest, lit a single candle each morning in the chapel. It sat on the altar beside a bowl of stale bread and a frozen branch of holly, symbolic offerings to saints and spirits both. He prayed not for warmth or food anymore, but for peace. For the young who would not live to marry. For the old who suffered quietly. For the women who bled in childbirth in the cold and the dark. For the men who did not return from the woods. Some nights, he left the door unbarred. And sometimes, when the moon was low, villagers crept in, wordless, hunched, frostbitten. They knelt beside the altar, and Father Osric said nothing. He simply placed a hand on their shoulder, a small mercy in a world that had forgotten mercy. And then, one night, a stranger came. Scarf, Chapter 9. The Cloaked One. No one saw her enter. She was wrapped in a fur-lined cloak the color of ash, her boots stitched with twine and rawhide. A long braid of black hair trailed over her shoulder, tied at the end with a silver ring. She carried no torch, yet her path was straight, as though the night bent itself around her. She said her name was Mare, that she had come from the north, from beyond the mountains, where the snow never melted and the wind sang in voices not heard by men. She spoke of herbs that grew beneath the frost, and animals who did not sleep through winter, and of stars that whispered secrets to those who listened. Willem distrusted her. Annette, too tired to care, welcomed the help. For Mare knew things. She dug in the snow and pulled up bitterroots. She wrapped Lisa's legs in crushed mint and boiled pine bark to soothe Tonkin's cough. She said little, but worked always. Even Lady Ellen heard of her from the steward's gossip and wondered if the gods had sent something in the snow, not a curse, but an answer. Whether witch or healer, Mare was not afraid of the cold. And that made the village feel, for the first time in weeks, that winter might have an end. Waxing Crescent Moon, Chapter 10. The Waiting Moon. The moon turned once more in the sky. And slowly, so slowly, the air changed. The cold was still sharp, but there was something beneath it now, a softness. A distant wetness. The snow began to sag at the edges, and the river, once locked in ice, crackled faintly beneath its glass skin. Birdsong, faint as breath, was heard one morning from the eaves. Willem opened the door and saw mist instead of frost, mud instead of ice. He fell to his knees, not from joy, but from the sudden exhaustion of hope. Winter was not over, but it was beginning to die. Part 3. The Thaw and the Reckoning. The wind still blew, but now it carried the scent of wet soil rather than ice. The frost that once crept across every surface now retreated, inch by reluctant inch. Ice broke like brittle glass on the well's surface. Water trickled again down the rutted lanes of Dunlow, carving paths through slush and mud. The trees, still black and bare, wept as their limbs thawed, dripping tears of winter's long-held grief. It was not a joyous spring, not yet. It was the season between seasons. The hunger remained, deeper now, gnawing into marrow. The dead had not yet been buried. There was still no seed to sow, and the sun, while brighter, held no warmth in its rays. Sheaf of Rice, Chapter 11. The Graves Beneath the Snow. When the snow finally loosened its hold, it gave up the dead. The villagers found them one by one, bodies half frozen beneath drifts behind cottages, slumped near doorways, huddled in haylofts. Some had gone out to search for firewood and never returned. Others had curled beside cold hearths and simply stopped. Father Osric, wearier than ever, gathered the names in silence. He no longer rang the chapel bell for each soul. It rang too often, too long. Instead, he walked with the gravediggers, his robes soaked in mud and melted snow, muttering quiet prayers as they laid the dead to rest. "Let them rest in the earth they could not till," he whispered, over and over. "Let them find warmth in what lies beyond." Lise stood beside one of the shallow graves, her hand in her mother's. She did not cry. She hadn't wept since Tonkin passed. His grave was marked with a toy sheep made of twine. Candle, Chapter 12. The Ashwoman's Warning. Mare, the stranger, had remained through the worst of the winter. Now, as spring teased the horizon, she grew restless. Each day she ventured deeper into the woods, returning with herbs wrapped in bark or tied in long strips of linen. She began carving symbols into the beams of houses, charcoal spirals, stars, a twisting vine with thorns. Some villagers feared her for it. Others whispered she kept the wolves at bay. One evening, as the stars came out and fog crept low across the fields, she stood outside the chapel and spoke, her voice low but clear. "Spring is not forgiveness," she said. "It does not forget." No one answered. She looked skyward. The land remembers. Every frozen seed, every bitter death, every vow broken in the cold. Spring will raise them all. Then she turned and walked back into the dark. Father Osric, watching from the chapel steps, crossed himself. But he remembered her words. Pig, Chapter 13. The Hunger After Hunger. With the thaw came the reckoning. The village had survived, but survival left scars. Children were thinner, faces hollow. Crops had to be planted soon, but the ground was thick with rot and too wet to till. Tools had rusted. Animals were sick or gone. The lone pig that remained refused to eat. It stared at the wall as if waiting for something. Willem walked the fields with other men. He no longer thought about harvests. He thought only of what could be done to keep his family alive until summer. He bartered what little he had. Annette's sewing needle, Joran's boots, a strip of leather from his belt. Lady Ellen, from her tower window, saw the smoke rising from the village and made a decision. She summoned her steward. "The seed stores," she said. "Open them, and send men to help plow the fields." "My lady," the steward warned, "if we share our grain, the castle will suffer." Ellen did not look away from the window. "We already suffer. Let's not add guilt to the list." The next morning, men in the village awoke to find sacks of barley and rice stacked at the edge of the path, stamped with a castle seal. No message, no demand, just grain and hope. Seedling, Chapter 14. A Sprout in the Dust. It was a single green thing. Tiny, delicate. It pushed up through the mud beside the chapel wall, an early shoot, no more than the length of a finger. Lee saw it first and dropped to her knees in the dirt. She did not speak. She only stared at the small leaf, trembling in the breeze. Then she whispered, as if afraid to break it, "It's real." Her mother came behind her, brushing her daughter's hair with stiff fingers. "Yes," she said, "it's real." Word of the green shoot spread. Children came to look at it, as if it were a miracle.
And in a way, it was.
Life, so simple, so unremarkable, felt holy again. Fallen Leaf Chapter 15. The Season Between. And so, the weeks passed. The mud dried in patches. The birds returned, cautious. The wolves withdrew. But spring did not forget. Mare left the village one misty morning without a word. She walked into the forest, her braid glinting silver in the early light. Only Father Osric saw her go. "Will you return?" he asked.
She paused.
"If the land calls," she said. "Or if the cold comes again." He nodded. And she was gone. Lady Ellen, in her stone keep, began holding council again. She summoned the village elders to speak of rebuilding, of grain trade, of a future that no longer felt like a lie. The villagers tilled the earth. They planted. They waited. They still sang songs by firelight, but now the songs had verses of hope. They told stories not only of the winter past, but of the spring that would follow, of seeds and stars, of the pig that survived, of the girl who first saw the sprout. And at night, when the wind came warm and soft through the shutters, some even dared to dream. The snow was gone. The ground, once entombed beneath layers of frost and silence, had softened. Grass returned in uneven tufts, pale and trembling like newborn fawns. Trees budded slowly, unsure whether to trust the sky again. The river ran swift and swollen, fed by the melting heart of distant mountains. And in the village of Dunlow, life began again, not in triumph, but in exhaustion. Blossom Chapter 16. The First Flowers. It began with wild violets. Tiny blossoms, purple as ink, sprouted along the edges of the old cart path. Lise found them first while gathering firewood. She knelt in the mud and pressed her fingers to their petals, half expecting them to dissolve into ash. When she brought them home, her mother Annette placed them in a chipped cup beside the hearth. They did nothing to fill the belly, but they reminded the family that not everything beautiful had perished in the cold. In time, other flowers followed. Primrose,
Yellow and shy.
snowdrops, bold and pale. Then came the bees, haggard things, slow from hibernation, yet determined. The fields began to hum again. The villagers called it the waking, not of nature, but of themselves. They had survived. That was not nothing. Sheaf of Rice Chapter 17. Seeds in the Ash. The planting season began late, but with urgency. Willem and the other men plowed the fields with broken tools and calloused hands. The oxen were thinner, their ribs like the slats of barrels, but they pulled the crude wooden plows through the sodden ground without protest. The seed grain given by Lady Ellen was doled out carefully, measured in wooden bowls, mixed with ash and herbs to discourage pests. Each kernel dropped into the soil was a prayer, each row a fragile hope. And yet, as days passed, green shoots appeared, row by row, field by field. Father Osric blessed them all, walking barefoot through the fields, robes trailing in the mud. "The earth has not forgotten us," he said quietly. "Nor has God." Some believed him. Others simply kept digging. Castle Chapter 18. The Quiet Court. In the keep above, the noble household stirred to life. The halls, once empty and cold, echoed again with footsteps. Servants returned from nearby towns. The blacksmith's fire roared to life. The tapestries were unrolled, beaten of dust, and hung anew. Lady Ellen, seated upon her modest oaken chair, no longer held court with stern commands, but with careful questions. She asked after births, after orphans, after the sick and the weak. She ordered that new granaries be dug deeper into the earth, and that every household be given a portion of dried fruit and salted fish from the castle stores. Her steward objected. Of course. If we give too freely, they will come to expect it. Ellen raised her eyes. If we give too little, they will remember it. And so, the doors of the keep remained open, for the first time in years. In the high tower, Ellen wrote letters to distant barons, to monasteries, and to her cousin in the capital. She asked for trade, for grain, for books, and for medicines. But beneath the weight of duty, she sometimes stood at the narrow window and stared at the woods beyond the river, wondering if she would ever see Mare again. Full Moon Chapter 19. The Fire Festival. By midsummer, the village prepared for the fire festival, a ritual as old as Dunlow itself. Once held in celebration of planting and fertility, the festival had become, this year, something else, a mourning masked as joy, a burial for winter, a promise that it would never return. The people gathered in the fields beneath the rising moon. Bonfires were built of pine and ashwood. Children wore wreaths of wildflowers. The old sang hymns, and the young danced in bare feet across the warming soil. Lise lit the first fire. She held the torch with both hands and approached the stacked wood. For a moment, it seemed too heavy, too bright. But she pressed forward, touched flame to bark, and the pyre leapt to life. Everyone cheered.
But some wept.
Father Osric offered no sermon. Instead, he stood among the crowd, head bowed. Willem and Annette danced for the first time in years. Lady Ellen watched from horseback, her guards at a respectful distance. When the villagers noticed her, they clapped and bowed low, but she raised her hand. "Tonight," she said, "there is no lord or peasant, only the living." And then she dismounted, removed her shoes, and stepped barefoot into the field. Maple Leaf Chapter 20. Shadows of the Warmth. But even in warmth, shadows remained. The forest, though green again, held fewer animals. The deer had returned, but in smaller herds. The wolves still watched from the treeline, silent. The trees were heavier, somehow, bent not with snow, but memory. A sickness came in late summer, not as fierce as plague, but cruel all the same. It took children and elders, striking them with fever and strange dreams. Mare did not return. The villagers turned to the chapel, to honey wine, to crushed mint leaves and cold compresses. Some lived, some did not. Lise, now nearly grown, began tending the sick herself. She remembered Mare's teas, her songs. She sang them softly over each bed. One morning, after tending to a sick boy, she found something at her doorstep, a bundle of pine needles, a small sachet of herbs, and a silver ring bound with thread. No one saw who left it, but she wore the ring from then on. Waxing Crescent Moon Chapter 21. The autumn that waited. And so the seasons turned. Harvest came late but full. The grain was heavy, the apples red and fat. The river shrank to a gentle murmur, and the air smelled of smoke and cider. Yet none in Dunlow forgot the winter. None took the sun for granted. Willem built stronger walls. Annette lined the roof with tar. Joran, now a man, joined the castle guard. Lise gathered herbs for the next cold season. Lady Ellen ordered new roads laid and stone shelters built. The castle library doubled in size. Father Osric taught reading to those who wished to learn, saying, "If winter returns, let us meet it wiser." And far to the north, beyond the forest and the river, Mare walked alone through frostbitten woods that never thawed, her breath curling in the air, her cloak heavy with snow. Listening always to the land, waiting. The air had shifted. Where once summer had shimmered with golden light and laughter in the fields, now there was a hush upon the land, a stillness. The crows returned to the trees. The leaves began to wither and fall, first one, then many, gathering like rust across the stone paths and muddy lanes. Dunlow prepared again, not with panic, but with caution, because no one, not even the elders, had forgotten the winter that came before. And though the sun still rose, and the grain sat heavy in sacks, the people had learned to respect the turning of the world. For even the most generous season must one day close its hand. Fallen Leaf Chapter 22. Lise the Listener. Lise no longer wandered the village as a child. She moved with purpose now, her feet sure on the packed earth paths. People nodded to her when she passed, some with respect, some with something closer to superstition. She carried herbs in satchels on her belt, and her braid had grown long, tied with a silver ring. They called her Lise the Listener because she heard things others did not. The whisper of wind through barley. The way illness stirred before it showed its teeth. The way grief echoed in the bones of the sick. She had no title, no office. But when a babe would not sleep, or an elder coughed blood into their cloth, they came to her. She spoke little, but when she did, it was gently. Steep the bark in rainwater, she told the smith's wife, whose child burned with fever. Do not fear the dreams, she told the shepherd boy, who woke screaming of ice. In her hut, near the eastern wood, she kept dried rosemary and pine, bundles of mint, a prayer carved in birch, and one gift she never used, a vial of black oil sealed with wax, wrapped in old fur. It had been left, she believed, by Mare. And some nights, when the stars wheeled overhead and the mist rolled in, Lise lit a fire of sweetwood and sat beside it, waiting. She was not sure for what. Castle Chapter 23. The Cracks in Stone. In the keep above the village, Lady Ellen met with lords. They came from east and south, cloaked in velvet, with rings on their fingers and whispers in their wake. They spoke of alliances, of taxes, of coin that could be traded for grain, iron, or men. They offered sons in marriage. Some offered threats. One baron, broad-shouldered and smiling, placed a polished dagger on her table. For your protection, my lady, he said. Ellen only smiled, then handed it to her steward. The last man who gave me a dagger now grows turnips in his skull. Still, she was tired. Winter had taken more than food and warmth.
It had taken time. Years.
Now the kingdom stirred again, hungry not just for bread, but for power. The crown sent messengers with wax seals and veiled demands. The king, distant and sickly, wanted tribute.
Grain. Coin.
Soldiers. And so, Lady Ellen did what she had always done, stood alone, spine straight, eyes clear. But at night, she returned to her chambers and removed her rings. She sat in the candlelight, hands bare, and stared at the hearth where the fire barely touched the corners of the stone. You were right, she whispered once, though no one was there. Spring does not forget. Evergreen Tree Chapter 24. Mare's Path. Far north of Dunlow, where the land no longer remembered the sun, Mare walked the dead woods. Here, the trees did not bloom. They stood black and tall, reaching skyward like fingers searching for something just out of reach. Frost clung to them, even in summer. There were no birds, only silence and the crunch of her boots through brittle underbrush. She walked toward a place the old ones had whispered about. A hollow beneath the mountain. A place of forgotten things, where the wind never spoke and even wolves feared to tread. For weeks, she followed signs, markings in stone, bones arranged in spirals, runes half swallowed by moss. She lit no fire, ate little, drank from still pools. And one day, she came to it, a cave mouth, rimmed with ice. From within came no sound, but the air was warm, too warm. She placed a hand on the stone. It trembled. Fire Chapter 25. The season remembers. Back in Dunlow, the earth began to cool again. The grain was brought in. The cellars sealed. Smoke rose daily from chimneys. Children were fitted for cloaks. Women cured meat, stitched wool, and counted candles. But there was unease. Birds migrated too early. The sheep refused the upper pastures. One morning, the river ran black for an hour before clearing again. Father Osric found dead fish along the banks, eyes glazed, mouths open. He called a meeting in the chapel. We survived last winter by grace, he said. Let's not grow proud. The villagers nodded, but fear was a quiet thing. It slithered through the spaces between words. Lurking. And Lise?
She dreamt again.
The same dream, over and over. A tree without leaves. A woman wrapped in fur, walking into fire. A whisper. Not all winters are of snow. The air turned brittle again. It came not with snow, not yet, but with stillness. A silence that clung to the trees and weighed heavy on the breath. The birds were gone. The rivers ran slow and dull. Smoke from chimneys no longer rose straight. It curled low, as if afraid to reach the sky. And beneath the surface of the world, in forgotten woods and hollow hills, something very old began to shift. Fog, Chapter 26, The Warning Frost. It was mid-autumn when the frost returned, earlier than ever before. Lise awoke to find the herbs in her window wilted, their edges blackened. The inside of her door was rimmed with ice. Her breath came out in clouds, even though the fire had not gone out. Outside, the villagers scraped frost from their water buckets and found their goats huddled, silent and uneasy. Even the dogs did not bark. They simply watched the woods. "It's too soon," Willem muttered, wrapping his cracked hands in cloth. "The harvest isn't even counted," Annette said softly. And from the chapel tower, Father Osric rang the bell. Not for the dead this time, but as a call. "Come," he said, voice echoing through the mist. "The season turns again." But Lise had already known. For weeks she dreamt of it, a white wind creeping through the forest, leaving silence in its wake. A voice behind it, not cold, but hollow. Not cruel, but curious. "You called," it whispered in her sleep. "Now I answer." Candle, Chapter 27. The keep sealed tight. In the stone keep above Dunlow, Lady Ellen summoned her council. They came with frost on their cloaks and unease in their eyes. The steward spoke first. "The stores are not ready. The root cellars are damp. One is already molding." "There is not enough salt for preservation," said the cook. "We used it all last winter." "And the king's men still press for tribute," said the bailiff. "They demand silver or men." Ellen listened. She said nothing until they had all emptied their worries into the room. Then, calmly she stood. "Last year we feared death. This year we prepare for it." She ordered the west wing sealed, the chapel lined with straw, and the stables reinforced. The castle gates would not open again without her word. "If this is to be a harder winter," she said, "we will not break. Not again." But later, alone in her chamber, she took out a letter she had never sent, addressed to her cousin in the court. She set it in the hearth and watched it burn. Snowflake, Chapter 28. Mare and the fire beneath. Far to the north, Mare descended into the mountain. The cave walls were slick with frost, but the air was not cold. It was dry, humming, alive with the sound of stone breathing. The path wound downward, narrow and steep. At first, she lit a lantern. Then it died. And still she walked. Days passed. Or hours. Time bent strangely below. And then, she reached it, a chamber, vast and echoing, carved not by nature, but by hands long vanished. In the center stood a monolith of ice, taller than any tower, veined with light. Beneath it something moved, a figure, or a shape, or a memory frozen in time. Its limbs were long. Its eyes were closed. Around it were markings burned into the stone floor, circles within circles, symbols of winter and sleep. Mare stepped forward, placing her palm on the ice. It opened its eyes. Waning Crescent Moon, Chapter 29. The second winter begins. Snow fell. Not gently, not in flurries, but all at once. Overnight, Dunlow was buried in white. The weight of it collapsed roofs. Trees snapped under the load. The wind came shrieking from the north like a horn of war, ripping the thatch from cottages and scattering ashes from the hearth. The village, barely healed, was silenced again. But this time it was different. The snow did not melt by midday. The animals did not stir. And the sky, clouded, greenish-gray, never changed. It was as if the sun had turned away. Lise lit every candle in her hut and marked the door with salt. She crushed pine needles with dried mint and burned them in a circle. Still, the cold came in. Tompkins' toy sheep, still kept near the hearth, cracked in half without warning. "This is not the season," she whispered. This is something else. Cloud with Snow, Chapter 30. The Echo of Hunger. 3 days in, the first child fell ill. Then 2 more. Not from fever, not from cough, but from sleep. They would not wake. Their breath fogged mirrors. Their eyes twitched beneath closed lids. Dream fever, said Lise. Or something older. She tried everything, bitterroot, warmed milk, sage smoke, but nothing roused them. Only one thing remained consistent. All of them murmured in sleep. Not in pain. Not in fear.
But in awe.
They described a woman with eyes like ice, a voice like wind through hollow trees, hands that stirred the stars. They called her the Winter Mother. And Lise, standing at their bedsides, felt something stir deep in her bones. She had heard that name before. In Mare's songs. Lise knelt beside the sick children, now 5 in total. They lay still in the chapel, their cheeks pale, their lips faintly blue. And though the wind howled outside, inside the stone walls of Dunlow's little chapel, all was strangely warm. She speaks to them, said old Myrna, a midwife whose grandson was among the sleepers. They smile in their sleep, as if they've gone somewhere beautiful. But Lise was not comforted. Each night she dreamed what they dreamed, except her vision went deeper. She saw herself walking barefoot through a white forest. The trees were tall and skeletal, and their branches moved though there was no wind. Above, the sky shimmered with strange lights, and in the center of it all stood a woman cloaked in frost and silence. The Winter Mother. She wore a crown of black branches tipped with ice. Her face was pale, more statue than flesh. But her eyes, impossibly old, impossibly calm, were full of knowing. Daughter of fire, she whispered to Lise in the dream. Why do you flee the cold that made you? And Lise would always wake with frost on her lashes, the candle burned low, and her breath misting in her own home. She knew then that this winter was not weather. It was memory. It was return. Snowcap Mountain, Chapter 32. Mare's Choice. Deep beneath the mountain, Mare stood before the ice monolith, her hand still pressed to its cold surface. Behind it, the being within stirred. It did not break free. It did not rage or roar. Instead, it spoke, not with sound, but with the trembling of the stone itself. You are not mine, it said. Yet you came. Mare closed her eyes. She had known this voice before she was born. Her ancestors had feared it, had buried it, had sworn oaths to keep it sleeping. But oaths weaken, and the world had grown warm, careless. The land remembers, Mare whispered. It always remembers. The ice pulsed gently. Then wake me. Mare withdrew her hand. Not yet. She turned, cloak swirling behind her, and began the long climb back to the surface. She carried no flame, only silence and the echo of something waiting. Castle, Chapter 33. The Keep in Shadow. Atop the hill, the keep was nearly buried. Snow reached halfway up the outer walls. Servants no longer ventured into the lower halls. Many were sealed now with ice. Fires refused to catch in certain hearths. Food had grown strange. Meat spoiled too fast. Bread grew mold overnight. The dogs had stopped barking. Lady Ellen stood in her solar, staring through a slit window at the pale, white land. Somewhere in the distance, wolves cried. But even that sound seemed muffled. She had not slept in 2 days. The steward came to her that morning, eyes sunken, face pale. There's unrest, he said. Some blame you. They say your mercy last year cursed us all. Mercy is never a curse, Ellen said. They remember Mare, the ash woman, the witch. They say you welcomed her. Ellen turned slowly. Did I not feed them through winter? Did I not open the keep? You did, he admitted. But they're afraid. Afraid of the girl. Of Lise. A silence. Ellen's voice was quiet. Then they have good reason. Milky Way, Chapter 34. The Firekeeper's Daughter. Lise walked alone that night. Snow fell softly, and where it landed near her feet, it hissed and vanished. Beneath her steps, the snow turned to steam. She walked to the edge of the forest, The place where she'd first found the sprout the spring after the last brutal winter. Now, nothing remained of that sprout. Only frost. And a circle of stones that had not been placed by human hands. She stood within them and whispered, "I know you hear me." There was no answer. But the trees moved, not by wind, but by will. "You chose me," Lee said, "but I am not yours." The branches cracked. Ice fell like shards of glass. "I belong to the living." She knelt and placed her palms to the snow. And for a moment, just a moment, the earth beneath her grew warm. Snowflake, Chapter 35. What returns? That night, Mare arrived in Dunlow. No one saw her enter. She simply appeared, walking through the snow with slow, deliberate steps. Her cloak was white with frost, her eyes darker than ever. She came to the chapel, placed her hand on the door, and the candles within flared. Lise looked up. They said nothing. And then Mare said, very softly, "It has begun." Lise nodded. "How do we stop her?" Mare looked toward the mountains. "We don't. We remember. That's what she wants." "What does she want remembered?" Mare met Lisa's eyes. "The hunger, the cold, the silence, the cost of forgetting what we owe the earth." "Then what do we do?" Mare smiled faintly. "We teach it mercy." Part 8. Fire, Frost, and the Forgotten Oath. Waxing Crescent Moon, Chapter 36. The Dream That Bleeds. The children still slept.
But their dreams had changed.
They no longer whispered of the Winter Mother's beauty or the cold peace of her realm. Now, their voices trembled in fear. Even in sleep, Lise heard them murmur, "She's looking for the fire. She knows who left her. She walks now. She's waking." Lise sat beside them with her palms pressed to the stone floor. The warmth she once carried was harder to summon now. Something deep inside her pulsed with resistance, as though the world itself were turning against heat, against life. She had begun to burn herself when she touched metal. Her hands blistered easily. The breath of frost clung longer to her clothes. And yet, she felt no chill. Only weariness. As if winter was not freezing her, but feeding from her. Castle Chapter 37. The Keep Fractures. In the keep, Lady Ellen faced mutiny. It began with the guards refusing a patrol. Then the cook hoarded salted pork for his own kin. Then 3 villagers broke into the storehouse. One was caught. He died by dawn, frozen, not beaten. His body lay in the courtyard with no sign of injury. Only a thin rime of frost across his lips and his eyes wide open, as if he had seen something terrifying in his final breath. The steward, pale and shaking, brought this news to Ellen. "They say the cold is alive," he said. "They say we are cursed." Lady Ellen said nothing for a moment. Then she rose, walked to the high window, and stared out at the land below. A field of unbroken, white stretched for miles. The forest stood like black knives in the distance. "No," she said. "Not cursed. Called." She turned to her steward. "Gather those who still listen. We make for the village at first light. We'll need Lise. And the witch." Compass Chapter 38. Mare's Memory. Mare stood at the edge of Dunlow, her eyes fixed on the northern sky. There, behind the clouds, something pulsed. A green shimmer, like ghost light. A wound in the firmament. She had seen that light once before, as a child, in a story sung by her grandmother. A song in a tongue no longer spoken. A lullaby for the things that sleep beneath the world. When the stars bleed cold and the earth draws breath, the queen of ice shall wake from death. Forget her once, she'll walk again. And take her tithe in frost and flame. Mare sang that lullaby now as she built the circle. Stone by stone, salt by salt. She marked it with ash and blood, her own, from the cut of a blade that had once belonged to her mother. And when the circle was complete, she sat at its center and whispered, "I am not afraid of you." The wind stopped. Even the snow paused. Something listened. Evergreen Tree Chapter 39. The Frozen Grove. Lise followed the dreams. Not the sleeping children this time, but her own. They led her to a grove deep within the forest. She had never seen it before, and yet she knew it. The trees here were wrong, twisted, half-frozen even in the roots, their trunks bowed as if in reverence or grief. There were no birds. No sounds at all. In the center stood a small altar of stone, half buried in frost. Symbols were etched across it, spirals, teeth, stars. A small basin held water that never froze. When Lise approached, the water rippled. A voice echoed around her, though no mouth spoke. "You are flame-born. Why do you come here?" Lise stepped closer. "To ask why you took the children." A pause. Then the voice again, softer now. "They came willingly. To remember. To warn." "Warn who?"
You.
The snow rose in sudden fury, spiraling upward in a storm. From within it, a figure stepped forward, tall, cloaked in ice, crowned with black branches. The Winter Mother. Her eyes were not cruel. They were tired. "You have forgotten us." Lise trembled, not from fear, but from recognition. "I'm not one of yours. All fire was once frost." Fire Chapter 40. The Truth Beneath. At that moment, Mare stood before the villagers, those who had dared leave the keep with Lady Ellen. They gathered in the square, wrapped in furs, faces pale, breath short. The sky had begun to change. Snow no longer fell in flakes. It fell in shards, sharp-edged, silent. "You think this is punishment," Mare said. "It's not. It's memory. And you've built your lives on forgetting." Lady Ellen stepped forward. "Then teach us what we forgot." Mare nodded, then knelt and carved a symbol into the snow, a spiral within a spiral. "Long ago, we made a pact with the seasons. Fire for frost. Life for silence. A balance. And we broke it," Lise said, emerging from the grove, eyes alight. She stood beside Mare now, her breath glowing faintly in the air. "We took the warmth and left her in the dark." Mare looked up. "And now she asks only what was promised." Cloud with Snow, Chapter 41, The Tithe. The Winter Mother appeared at the edge of the village. She did not move like a woman. She drifted, her feet never touching the snow. Ice bloomed behind her, threading through wood and stone alike. The people dropped to their knees. Some wept. Some closed their eyes. Lise stepped forward. "What do you want?" The Winter Mother's voice echoed from everywhere at once. "Memory. Balance. Mercy." Mare stepped beside Lise, holding a bundle wrapped in fur. She unwrapped it, revealing a coil of flame, living, breathing fire captured in a ring of silver. An heirloom. A promise. The heart of fire once gifted by the earth to men. "We offer this," Mare said. "And ourselves." The Winter Mother paused. Then, slowly, she reached out and placed a hand over the flame. The snow stopped. The wind ceased. Children stirred in their beds. And the frost began to retreat. Chapter 42. The Waking Earth. When dawn came, it was not with warmth, but with silence. The kind of silence that sits heavy in the bones, as if the world were holding its breath. In the center of Dunlow, the villagers still knelt in the snow, heads bowed as the Winter Mother stood before them, her crown of black branches unmoving. The coil of flame Mare had offered still burned faintly in her hand, and where it glowed, the ice receded. Lise stood now at the mother's side. She felt the pull of two natures inside her, the fire of her birth, the frost of her dreams. The Winter Mother turned to her. "You carry both," she said. "You will be the bridge." Lise felt the breath catch in her throat. What does that mean? To seal the old pact, one must return to root and ash. The flame cannot stand alone, nor the frost. You must choose balance and give up the shape you know. Mare stepped forward. "You mean she must die?" The Winter Mother looked at Mare with something like sorrow, not death. Becoming. Fire Chapter 43. The Ash Trial. That night, Lise sat alone by the sacred grove, her hands cupped around the flame her ancestors had stolen. It flickered restlessly, as though it knew what was coming. Mare knelt beside her. You don't have to do this, she said quietly. There may be another way. Is there? Lise asked. We forgot. We took what was never ours. And now the land is breaking. She paused. What if I can become the bridge? Not just end the winter, but keep the balance so it doesn't fall again. Mare was silent. Finally, she took Lisa's hand and placed a small, black seed into it. Then take this. The last of the ash tree's heart. The first tree. The one that bound us to the earth. What will it do? Plant it inside yourself. And when you go to the mother, give her both, the fire and the root. Let her shape you. Lise swallowed hard. Then she stood and walked into the white. Snowflake, Chapter 44. The Offering. The villagers watched from the edge of the grove as Lise approached the winter mother one final time. Snow fell thick, but did not touch her skin. The mother lowered her crown. For the first time, she looked small, less a goddess, more a weary spirit holding together the weight of centuries. You have brought the seed, she said, and the fire. Lise placed both in the snow between them. Take them, and take me. The winter mother nodded once. Then she bent forward and whispered something ancient in Lise's ear, not in words, but in images, frost creeping over a field of blood, flame rising from the sea, a tree growing in the heart of a dead city. Lise closed her eyes. Then she vanished. No scream, no body, no ash, only a bloom of soft green moss, unfurling gently in the snow. Seedling, Chapter 45. The Thaw. 3 days passed. On the fourth morning, the snow began to melt. It started slowly, icicles dripping, rooftops steaming. Then faster, torrents pouring from the hillsides, rivers breaking through their frozen banks. Birdsong returned. The children awoke. They remembered little, but each one hummed a tune no one had taught them, a quiet melody that seemed older than time. The winter mother was gone. Her crown lay in the sacred grove, black branches now budding with pale green shoots. Lady Ellen declared no more taxes that spring. The fields were to be shared. The storehouses opened. And Mare took to the woods, not as exile, but as guardian. They called her Ash Mother now, keeper of balance. Sun behind small cloud, Chapter 46. What remains? Years passed. Lise did not return, at least not in the form they knew. But sometimes, when children played in the grass near the grove, a warm breeze would pass through, and wildflowers bloomed too early. Sometimes, during heavy rains, an unseen heat would rise from the soil and protect the roots. And each spring, a tree in the grove grew taller than the rest, an ash with bark like old iron and leaves that shimmered faintly gold at the edges. The villagers left offerings there.
Bread. Seeds.
Small carvings. Not in fear, but in thanks. They did not forget her. And because of that, winter never stayed too long again. Tulip Epilogue. The Age of Remembering. In the records of Dunlow, once just a cold village on the edge of the Old Kingdom, this story became the first page of a new calendar. Year 1 of the Ash Cycle. Where once men fought frost with greed and fire, they now made pact. Children were taught the song of the 4 seasons. And when winter returned, as it always did, they welcomed it. With patience, with preparation, and always with memory. Because in forgetting, winter had once become cruel. But in remembering, it became beautiful. Part 10. The Second Forgetting. A generation later. Sheaf of Rice, Chapter 47. The First Cracks. The ash tree still stood.
Tall. Pale.
Regal. Its golden-tipped leaves marked each season's turn like a clock made of roots and wind. The people of Dunlow gathered each solstice in the grove, laying out wreaths of barley, braids of bread, and carved stones as offerings to the one they called the flame-binder, Lise, who gave herself to the frost and fire to restore the pact. But generations forget faster than stone weathers. And now, nearly 30 years since the thaw, few remembered the cold as it truly was. The winters had grown mild. Snow became novelty. Children laughed at the idea of curse frost and ice spirits. Priests from the lowlands came with new gods, written on scrolls and barked from pulpits. They scoffed at the old songs, called the ash tree a relic, the winter mother a fable, and the pact superstition. Even Lady Ellenson, now the Lord of Dunlow, spoke of cutting the tree down to build a proper chapel. "Let the frost come if it must," he said. "We've survived worse." But those who were old, truly old, felt it in their bones. A wrongness in the wind, a silence beneath the soil. And far in the north, the ice began to move again. Acts chapter 48. The day the tree bled. It happened just before the harvest. 3 men, under the Lord's order, came with saws and axes. They laughed as they approached the ash, one of them chewing on a barley stem, another humming a drinking song. The third paused, uncertain. "Should we really?" "It's just wood," the first man spat. "No spirit's going to stop a saw." But the moment steel touched bark, the sky turned. Clouds bloomed black overhead. Thunder without lightning. No wind. No birdsong. The tree groaned, not like timber bending but like a living thing in pain. And then it bled. Thick sap, dark red, like heart's blood, ran down the trunk and soaked the earth. The 3 men turned to flee. Only one made it back. He arrived with frost on his eyebrows and fingers turned black with rot. He died before morning, whispering only one word: "She's waking." Candle, chapter 49. The witch's granddaughter. Mare had died years ago, but her granddaughter lived, a girl named Rena, born during the first spring after the pact. She had flame in her hair and frost in her voice, and the village children called her half-sprite behind her back. Rena lived alone at the edge of the woods, raised on lore and lullabies. She knew the symbols, the stories, the bargains. She saw the frost come back. Thin at first, a creeping silver along the well stones, a chill in the hearth that refused to leave. Birds migrated early. The river slowed before the equinox. And the dreams returned. Children began to speak in sleep, just like before. Only now, they whispered not of the winter mother, but of Lise. "She's lost. She burns from within. She's looking for the tree. It's gone. They broke it. The balance is undone." Rena knew then, it wasn't just the frost coming back. It was the one who held it at bay unraveling. Milky Way chapter 50. The shattered flame. Far in the dream realm, beyond fire, beyond frost, something ancient trembled. Lise had not died. She had changed, transcended. She was both memory and force, root and ember, guardian of the border between warmth and silence. But the tree was her tether, and with its blood spilled, she faltered. She drifted between seasons, a spirit unmoored. Her thoughts tangled. Her purpose flickered. Where once she stood as bridge, she now became breach. A breach wide enough for other things to slip through. Forgotten spirits. Starless cold. And in the farthest northern sky, the aurora flared once more, green light tearing across the heavens like a wound. The raven light, they called it. The sign of the second winter. Snowcap Mountain, chapter 51. The pilgrimage begins. Rena packed a bundle of salt, ash, and barley bread. She tied her cloak with a spiral knot, kissed her mother's old talisman, and stepped beyond the village bounds. She would journey to the northern reach, to the ancient temple buried beneath frost and story, the place where the first pact was struck. She would find the Winter Mother, and she would find Lise. And somehow she would remind the world to remember, even if it meant striking a new bargain, even if it meant becoming something no human had ever dared before. Part 11. The Pilgrim and the Storm. Compass chapter 52. A world turned backward. Rena's boots crunched over frost-hardened moss as she stepped into the ancient path north, the one that wound through the old woods where even ravens refused to nest. Autumn should have held sway. The leaves should have been gold. But the trees were bare. The air burned cold with unnatural bite. Pools in the shade froze glassy still. She traveled alone, save for a white hound that found her on the third day, silent, thin, but refusing to leave her side. She called him Bran. The stars above her shifted, ever wrong, as though the sky no longer remembered its own shape. And in the distance, rising behind black pines and snow-hung ridges, she began to see the mountain of hollow ice, once a prison, now a beacon. "That's where she sleeps," Rena whispered. "Not sleeping," said a voice behind her. Staring back, she turned, but no one was there. Only the wind and a trail of feathers at her feet. Derelict House, Chapter 53. The Forgotten Temple. By the 6th day, Rena reached the ruins. Carved into the side of the mountain, half buried in glacial stone, the temple of first memory waited. She had seen drawings, charcoal sketches in her grandmother's journals. But they were wrong. This place was alive. Torches of blue flame flickered, though none had lit them. Walls breathed with frost-rimed moss. And at the far end of the great hall, beneath a dome of crystal and ash, stood the statue. A woman cloaked in winter, arms outstretched, palms open. One hand held flame, the other held a seed. The Winter Mother. Below her, etched into stone, were the old words of the pact. "Give, that you may keep. Bend, that you may grow. Burn, that the world may warm. Sleep, that the living may rise." Rena knelt. She placed salt, ash, and bread in a bowl of frozen obsidian. "I am of the remembering," she said. "I bring balance. I seek what was lost." The flame in the statue's hand flickered, and behind her, snow began to fall upward. Ice Cube, Chapter 54. The Heart Below. A voice whispered from the dark. "She is broken." Rena turned. From the shadows came a figure, tall, robed in ice threads, eyes pale blue like the deepest sea under frost. Not the Winter Mother, but her first priest, an ancient soul bound to serve memory. His name lost, his shape flickering with age. "Lise wanders," he said. "Not whole. She is the bridge, but the bridge is cracked." "Can she be healed?" Rena asked. "Perhaps. If she remembers her name." "She must remember. The world depends on it." The priest stepped closer. His breath misted like incense. "Then go to the place where names begin. The hollow below. The root of all pacts. Where fire met frost and dreamed of balance." He reached into the folds of his robe and gave her something small and cold. A shard of golden leaf. "She planted this," he said. "Where it grows, she still lives." And then he was gone. Only Bran the hound remained, ears back, tail low, staring into the dark that now pulsed like a living wound. Fog, Chapter 55. The Hollow Below. Rena and Bran descended into the crevasse behind the temple, a stair of frozen stone winding into Earth's throat. The air grew colder than death, yet she pressed on. At the bottom, the hollow opened, a vast chamber of crystal and darkness, where stalactites dripped molten frost and voices echoed without form. And there, suspended in the air like smoke trapped in glass, was Lise. Her eyes were closed. Her hair floated. Her body was made of flame and vine, root and ash. Pieces missing, memories flickering like broken stars around her. "Lise," Rena whispered. She took the shard of gold and pressed it to her own heart. "I remember you." The air changed. The frost cracked. And Lise opened her eyes. Fire, Chapter 56. The Flame Returns. Lise fell like a comet. The hollow burst into golden light. Bran howled. Ice shattered around them. When it cleared, she knelt before Rena, not spirit, not God, but woman again. Breathing. Shivering. "I forgot," she whispered. Rena knelt with her. "Then remember with me." Lise touched her own chest. "The tree, they heard it. I felt it break." "But it still grows," Rena said. "And so do we." They embraced. And from that place beneath the world, a pulse of warmth rose, up through the mountain, through the earth, through the snow. The auroras faded. The wind gentled. And the balance returned, not as before, but new, living, changing, remembered. Dove, Chapter 57. The Road South. Rena and Lise walked in silence through the thawing wilds. It had been 13 days since the hollow below, since flame returned to flesh and frost yielded its grip. Yet the path back to Dunlow was not warm, it was watchful. The trees bowed toward them. The wind shifted as they passed. Animals fled, then circled back at a distance, as if sensing something ancient rekindled. Bran led them. Lise said little. Her voice, when it came, cracked like old bark. She was still more than woman, still partly woven from pact and root, and every step through the mortal world seemed to strain her. "They've forgotten," she said one night by fire. "They chose to forget." Rena nodded. "And they will again, unless we remind them in a way that lasts." Castle Chapter 58. The Lord's Word.
Dunlow had changed.
Walls now circled the village, stone and iron, banners of gold stitched with a crown sun. The ash tree remained, but half its branches were severed. Guards stood at its base. And in the hall where Ellen once ruled with humility, her son, Lord Edrin, now held court with pomp and fire. He wore velvet and furs. He drank from silver. His voice echoed like commandment. "They will not fear winter again," he told his court. "I have given them order. Fire in the hearth, bread on the table. What need have we for old trees and childish songs?" When his steward whispered of strange omens, of the tree bleeding, of dreams returning, he laughed. Coincidence. And madness. Let them come to me with facts, not fables. And when a boy from the edge of the village spoke of a red-haired girl and a ghost of golden flame crossing the hills, Edrin ordered the gates closed. "No witches," he said. "No spirits. No more lies of the old blood." Milky Way Chapter 59. The Dreaming Night. That night, the villagers dreamed. All of them. The same dream. They stood in the sacred grove. The ash tree wept, and from the roots, frost bloomed, not violent, but hungry. It reached for fire, for warmth, for memory. Then came a voice, not spoken, but sung. "She walks again. She walks for you. Balance or binding. The choice is true." When they woke, many wept. Some fled. Others gathered candles and laid them in secret by the roots of the tree. And the oldest among them began to hum the song of the four seasons. Candle Chapter 60. The Return of Flame. At dawn, the gates of Dunlow burst open, not from force, but because the hinges froze and cracked. Rena and Lise walked through unchallenged. Guards backed away. Children watched from rooftops. A single bird, white, silent, circled once and vanished. They stopped at the ash tree. Rena knelt. Lise stood beside her, a thin flame curling from her hand, dancing like a memory. "You severed this," she said aloud, "to no one and to all. And now the pact is broken." Lord Edrin arrived moments later, armored, proud, surrounded by swords. "You have no place here," he said. "We rule by reason now. By crown. By coin." "You rule by fear," Lise said. "Fear of remembering." He raised his blade. "Leave, witch, before I bury your tree for good." But before he could speak again, the ash tree screamed. Not a sound, but a wave of memory, of warmth, of frost, of fire, of life. It surged through the grove. It cracked the earth. It lit every candle in the village at once. And it pulled Lord Edrin to his knees. Deciduistry Chapter 61. The True Crown. Lise stepped forward. The grove bloomed around her, green shoots in snow, blossoms in ice. The ash tree stood whole again. Reborn. "The pact lives," she said, "because the people remember." She turned to Edrin. "You built walls to hold out fear. But fear entered anyway, because forgetting is the true winter." She touched his shoulder. His armor melted. His sword turned to brittle wood. "Rule if you must, but do it in the light, or the frost will come again." Edrin sobbed. Not from pain. From understanding. National Bark Chapter 62. The Spring Crown. In the weeks that followed, the grove became a place of pilgrimage. Lise did not stay. She walked the land again, speaking to other villages, other forgotten places. She taught balance. She reminded. Rena remained in Dunlow, chosen by the ash tree to be its new voice, not queen, not priestess, but spring crown. A keeper, a bridge. The people no longer feared winter. They prepared for it, welcomed it, and they remembered, not just in song but in soil, in the stories they told, in the names they passed down.
Lise, Mare,
Rena, even Bran, whose grave beneath the tree was marked with these words. He walked between frost and flame, and chose loyalty. Part 13, The Frostbound War. Crossed Swords, Chapter 63, Rumors of Fire. It began with whispers carried on merchant tongues, that the southern kingdom of Valehar, once fractured and rich with gold, had forged a single banner, black sun on crimson, under a warlord-turned-king named Taran Vex. He claimed to bring enlightenment. He called the old ways poison. He outlawed packlore, burned the names of the Winter Mother and Lise from every scroll he found. And when his priests failed to melt the frost creeping into their southern minds, he did not turn to balance. He turned to war. If frost cannot be beaten by fire, we will bury it beneath steel. His eyes turned north to Dunlow. Shield Chapter 64. The Ash Tree Weeps Again. Rena woke one night to the sound of cracking roots. The ash tree, sacred, reborn, stood shivering in windless air. Frost bloomed along its base, but not natural. This frost was sick, too sharp, too bright. She pressed her palm to the bark and felt it.
fear.
But not from the tree, from the land itself. They come, she whispered, with iron and fire, and they do not seek peace. Bran's grave trembled. The candles around it flickered, and from the shadows, Lise emerged once more, wearing a mantle of night silver and ash leaf. Then it is time, she said. The world must choose again. World Map Chapter 65. The Three Alliances. Dunlow could not stand alone, so Rena rode, fast and far. To the east, she met with the Stone Wives, mountain dwellers who sang to the roots of the world. They remembered Lise. They offered their songs and their spears. To the west, the river clans, half-forgotten fisherfolk who spoke in riddles and traded in bone lore, agreed to open their fords and fight beside the old names. And to the far, cold north, she journeyed to Nimreach, where the last of the Frostborn slept in towers made of snowglass and salt. There she met the Herald of Hollow Ice, an ageless warrior who once swore to guard the first pact with his life. "Will you fight again?" Rena asked. "Only if you lead." "I will." The alliances were struck. Winter and Memory now marched beside her. Fire Chapter 66. The Burning Horizon. Taran Vex's army was vast. They came with trebuchets that hurled burning salt, with priests that spoke flame into stone. They carried banners of conquest, and behind them rode the Order of Emberlight, fanatics who believed it their duty to erase the old world. They did not slow when the land cracked beneath their boots. They did not heed the birds flying backward or the rivers flowing strange. They had forgotten, and so they would learn. Coldface Chapter 67. The Battle of Shattered Frost. It happened in the Vale of Orwyn, a place where the wind always whispered and the snow never fully melted. Rena stood at the head of the defenders, clad in the silver ash cloak, with Lise at her side and the root singers humming behind her. When the armies clashed, fire met frost, steel met soil, and for a time, the world seemed to fracture. But the old ways held. The ash tree, though far, pulsed through Rena like a drumbeat. Every name remembered, every pact honored, gave strength. Even Bran's howl echoed through the storm. The river clans struck from beneath the banks. The Stone Wives shattered the fire catapults with their songs. And Lise, no longer a drifting spirit but flame incarnate, walked through fire unburned. Taran Vex charged her himself. He raised a blade forged from southern suns and struck. She caught it in her bare hand, and it melted. "You cannot kill what you do not know," she said, "and you have forgotten everything." She whispered a word. Vex fell, not dead, but asleep, his memory locked in frost. His army scattered, and dawn broke over the snow. Sunrise Chapter 68. The Pact Renewed. After the war, a new pact was made. Not in secret groves or frozen hollows, but in the open. Before the ash tree, before every clan and kingdom that stood against the forgetting. Rena spoke the words, old and new, root and flame. We do not rule by fear. We do not burn to forget. We bend so we may grow. We balance so we may live. And the tree bloomed once more. A second crown of spring. This time it was not given to one. It was planted in many hands, a crown of roots, shared by all who remembered. Dove Epilogue, a future of seasons. Years passed. Winter still came, long, hard, and true. But people no longer feared them. They prepared. They shared. They remembered. Children sang the names of Lise, Rena, Mare. They lit candles for Bran. They wove frost symbols not to ward off death, but to honor balance. Even the southern lands, in time, sent pilgrims to the ash tree. To learn. To remember. To kneel not before a god, but before memory. Part 14. The Lantern Age. Candle Chapter 69. Embers in the Dark. 300 years have passed. The great ash tree still stands, taller than ever, roots twisting down to the forgotten bones of the hollow below. But where once people came to worship, now they pass by with indifference. The pact is a page in history, rewritten by scholars in the stone towers of the Empire of Mirian. They call the old ways rustic memory lore. They call Lise a folk myth. They say winter was never a threat, only a cycle of nature, tamed by progress, hearthstones, and trade. In the high halls of Mirian, amid chandeliers and crystal maps, the world is divided by quill, not sword. But outside the city walls, the frost stirs again, not as creeping ice, but as absence. Compass Chapter 70. The Girl with the Lantern. Her name was Kayla, daughter of a forgotten priesthood, raised in the marshlands west of Dunlow. Her mother spoke of Rena as a flame-bearer, her father of Bran as a silent guardian. But the village mocked them. That tree? They'd scoff. Just a stump with a legend. Kayla did not argue. She simply wandered. Each night, she lit a lantern. Not with flame, but with a flickering frost light passed down through her mother's blood. This light remembers, her mother would say. It doesn't burn. It binds. And it was this light that saved her. The night the sky cracked. Milky Way Chapter 71. When the stars vanished. It happened without warning. A silence deeper than sound. Then, the stars blinked out, one by one, as if swallowed by something behind the sky. Then the light from torches, hearths, and lanterns shrank. Not gone, drained. Like something was drinking the warmth, memory, life. People screamed. Fires failed. Frost returned, not white and soft, but shadowed and hollow. And above, in the empty sky, a shape moved. Not quite a beast. Not quite a god. Something lost. Something ancient. Something that had never been remembered, because it had never been defeated. Whole, Chapter 72, The Hollow Crown. The scholars called it the Nullborn. Others whispered the term hollow frost, a hunger that came not to freeze, but to unmake. Entire villages vanished without a scream. Not destroyed, forgotten. Gone from maps, from books, from memory. Even the ash tree in Dunlow lost a limb. And in the south, where fire had always reigned, the flame priests fell silent. Their temples burned cold. But Kayla's lantern burned on.
Weak.
Flickering. But resisting. Something in you is old, a wanderer told her, one of the root singers, long thought extinct. That frost light, it remembers the pact. Then I must find the tree, Kayla replied. The tree remembers, too, but it's bleeding again. Evergreen Tree Chapter 73, Journey to the Dimming Grove. Kayla set out alone. No horse. No coin. Only the lantern and a name.
Lise.
She crossed marsh, climbed ruined towers, past cities shrouded in blank snow. In one village, people did not speak. They had forgotten how. In another, time had stopped, a hearth forever halfway lit. The ash tree lay ahead. Dunlow was no longer a village. It was a circle of ruin, wrapped in frost that pulsed. The ash tree still rose, blackened, leaning, its bark whispering not in words but in sorrow. And when Kayla touched it, she saw everything. Mantelpiece Clock Chapter 74. The Long Memory. She fell into a dream. Saw Mare's chance. Lisa's sacrifice. Rena's war. She saw the frost before it had a name, back when it was simply the dark between stars, trying to be born in the warmth of living minds. She saw the truth. The Nullborn was not defeated. It was bound. By story. By pact. By memory. And now, because the world had forgotten, it was free. Windface Chapter 75. A new pact must be made. Kayla awoke with frost on her fingertips and a lantern now glowing like a star. The tree whispered in her mind. You are the echo. You are the ember. You must choose. She could run. Or she could remember enough and speak the names again and bind the Nullborn once more. But she would need more than memory. She would need others. And so Kayla turned north again, to seek the last remembering souls, and begin the journey, to forge the final pact. Scroll Chapter 76. The Pale Archivist. Kayla traveled northward for 12 days. Her lantern burned with frost light, faint but unwavering. Each step forward felt heavier, not from cold, but from the silence that followed her. Towns she passed had no names. Roads twisted and reformed behind her. The land no longer remembered itself. But in a gorge carved by time and sorrow, she found the ruins of Fenwald Keep, a library built of bonewood and moonstone. No roof, no fire, just scrolls, unfurling endlessly, as if time itself had been transcribed and left to rot. And within, hunched over a black scroll, sat the Pale Archivist. You carry a light, he rasped, not looking up. A memory, Kayla answered. The frost returns. Not frost, he said. Hollow frost. The Nullborn. The cold that does not freeze. It erases. She asked for help. He asked her a price. Not gold. Not blood. A name, he said. One you still hold close. She gave it. My mother's, Leora. And with that, he sighed. Then I will remember you. Classical Building Chapter 77. The Bonesong City. With the Pale Archivist as guide, Kayla pressed eastward into the Vale of Shorn, where the ground itself sang, not with joy, but with warning. There, beneath a mountain of shattered ivory, lay the ruins of Tyrithcon, the Bonesong City. Once a haven for the root singers and frost priests, now a monument to silence. But not all were gone. Deep below, in chambers of ash stone and salt glass, they found a people twisted by memory, faces tattooed with the names of ancestors, tongues cut to preserve silence. These were the remnants, last keepers of the old sound. They could not speak, but they sang, a haunting hum that made even the frost pause. And when Kayla showed them her lantern, they knelt and offered her the shard of echoes, a bone pendant carved from the last singer's spine, said to carry the voice of the first frost. It will sing when the hollow draws near, said the archivist. It will hurt, but it will warn you. Kayla took it. Her hand trembled for hours after. New Moon Chapter 78. The Hollow Flame. The hollow came not as shadow, but as warmth. A strange warmth, wrong in how it spread, how it clung to memory and devoured it like moths eat cloth. In the ruins of Velgen's Reach, Kayla found the air hot, yet the people froze mid-motion, forever trapped in loops of forgotten action. Children laughed without sound. Doors opened to rooms that didn't exist. At the heart stood a pyre, unlit, yet glowing. This was the hollow flame, a piece of the Nullborn's soul, left to rot into the world. Kayla approached it, the lantern flickering violently. The archivist warned her. Do not touch it. Do not name it. It feeds on attention. But Kayla did neither. She remembered.
She sang.
A single note, one of the bone songs gifted to her. It cracked the silence. It tore through the strange heat. And the hollow flame shrank.
It hissed.
It recoiled. It fled. Because memory, true, painful, precious memory, is poison to what is unmade. Chains Chapter 79. The Pact Reforged. They returned to the ash tree. It had grown thin, almost translucent. Not dying, drifting. Kayla knelt beneath it and carved the names she had gathered. Mare.
Lise.
Rena.
Bran.
Her mother. The archivist. Even the remnants, who had no names but melodies. Then she held her lantern high. The shard of echoes hummed. The archivist wept. And the tree bloomed. But not with flowers. With voices. Thousands. Millions. Names spoken by those who once lived. Stories once told and now returned. The tree drank them all. And in doing so, it awakened. This is not the end, the wind whispered. But it is a remembering. And far in the sky, the stars blinked back, not all, but enough to cast shadows again. The Nullborn recoiled. Not slain, not sealed, but challenged. Milky Way Chapter 80. The Night Without Wind. The stars returned, yes, but dim and restless. Kayla saw it in the way the shadows no longer moved with the sun. The world was waking, but part of it was dreaming still. The pale archivist called it the veil breach. There are cracks in the story, he said, tracing a finger through the ash bark of the tree. And if we don't seal them, the hollow will slip through again. Kayla asked where to begin. He handed her a map, blank at first, then flickering with frostlight ink, a single winding path, no landmarks, no names. Follow the cold within you, he said. Where memory goes when it fades, there you will find the dreamlands. So she lit her lantern and walked into a night without wind. Whole Chapter 81. The Black River. Beneath the tree, beneath the roots, beneath even the soil of history, there ran a river. Not of water, but of shadows, ink, and old blood. It pulsed with memory unmoored. Fragments of forgotten people floated on its surface like leaves, faces without names, voices without tongues. Kayla dipped her hand in.
Pain.
Visions. A king burning his own scrolls to protect a single song. A girl sealing her village into eternal winter to save them from war. A boy who never existed, begging to be remembered. This was the Black River, also known in some ruined books as Lethiashan, the place where names drowned. She had to cross it, but there were no boats. Only a creature, long, eel-like, blind, stitched with letters in a language older than frost. Name me, it hissed. And I'll carry you. Kayla hesitated. To name a thing was to bind it, and bind herself to it in turn. But she knew what was needed. She gave it her own middle name. Mirren, she whispered. The river stilled, and the creature bowed. Candle Chapter 82. The Cradle of Forgotten Gods. Beyond the river was not land, but sky, folded like cloth. It smelled of old parchment, melted wax, and dried herbs. Stars blinked in and out above. Here, gods came to die. Or rather, to sleep, unfed by prayer, untethered from memory. Kayla passed hundreds. A stag made of music. A wolf-faced woman with hands of rain. A great insect cocooned in logic. They twitched as she walked by, as if her presence was a noise in their long silence. But one stirred fully. A figure draped in tattered ice, crowned not in gold, but in roots. You bear her light, it said. The frost witch who sang of balance. Lise, Kayla replied. The god bowed. She named me once. I remember.
Barely.
But I do. Why are you here, Lightbearer? Kayla told it of the Nullborn, of the silence consuming memory,
Of the broken pact.
The god, known once as Aileron, keeper of weaves, reached forward. I will grant you a braid, 3 names, braided together. Use them, and you may tie a dream to a truth. Kayla accepted. In her hands appeared a glowing thread, warm, cold, weightless. A tool of binding. A beginning. Mantelpiece Clock Chapter 83. The Archivist's Sacrifice. When Kayla returned, the pale archivist was dying. Not from age. From unbinding. He had poured too much of himself into the keeping of names, and the hollow had found him. His hands had become translucent. His voice was cracked memory. I kept your name safe, he said. But I can't hold it much longer. Kayla wept. But he smiled. We all fade, child. But if you remember me, just once more, I am not gone. She whispered it. Elhen, pale archivist of Fenwald, keeper of the 8th song. And he vanished gently, not erased, but remembered. The ash tree shivered. The hollow paused for a moment, and in that pause, Kayla knew what had to come next. The binding must begin. Thread Chapter 84. The First Thread. Using the braid gifted by Aileron, Kayla prepared to sew together the first binding, not a prison for the hollow, but a memory net strong enough to catch forgotten names before they slipped. She needed 3 things: a truth no one believed, a song no one could forget, a name that refused to die. The braid shimmered, the lantern pulsed, and far off, beyond the veil, beyond the frozen cities, beyond the end of maps, the hollow turned. It knew, and it was coming. Cloud with Snow Chapter 89. The day the snow cried. The hollow had been named. It had recoiled, fled, not dead, but held. And with that, the first true snow in decades fell. But it was different.
It wept.
The flakes were warm to the touch, like melted tears frozen midair. Wherever they landed, graves, ruins, forgotten shrines, memories bloomed. Kayla stood beneath the ash tree as snow clung to her shoulders, and she remembered. Her mother's hands, worn and ink-stained. Rena's wild laughter echoing across battlefield snowdrifts. Lisa's song, half-hummed beneath her breath. Each flake was a story returning. But even this miracle held danger. For not all memories are kind. In the Valley of Thorin, the snow reawakened an ancient warlord, long dead, long reviled, who had once burned truth from every book he found. In the woods near Velgen's Reach, wolves dreamed of hunts they had never lived and began to prowl in waking memory. The last winter had begun, not cold, not cruel, but haunted. Crown Chapter 90. The Frostless King. In the city of Ironhold, the snow melted instantly upon the cobblestones. It was said the wind refused to blow there. At its center rose the figure of a young man, tall, crowned in iron, wrapped in robes that never wrinkled. They called him the Frostless King. He claimed to be born of Kayla's shadow, a child not of flesh, but of story. She bound the hollow, he declared. But stories are meant to end. We cannot live beneath the weight of the past forever. He banned all recollection ceremonies. He outlawed lullabies that predated the naming. His scribes burned the Book of Threads. And yet he smiled like Kayla. He carried a lantern of his own, but his light flickered cold. Kayla heard of him from the wandering remnants, who now sang only in whispers. And so she journeyed toward Ironhold, not to fight, but to understand. Crystal Ball Chapter 91. The Memory Well. On her way, Kayla stopped at a village called Corindel, where the snow refused to fall. Instead, at its center stood a well of memory, a black pit where townsfolk threw written thoughts to forget them. We forget, so we can move forward, the mayor explained. Too much memory poisons. Makes us linger. Makes us haunt ourselves. Kayla peered into the well. She saw visions. A child casting away the image of a father's angry eyes. A widow dropping a scarf to forget her grief. A soldier discarding the memory of war, and with it, all knowledge of why peace mattered. It horrified her. You are not healing, she said. You are unmaking yourselves.
She sang.
A single note. It struck the water like a bell. The well did not close, but it froze, sealing the discarded memories in place, returning weight to the hearts that had grown too light. Some wept. Others screamed. But the village remembered. And for the first time, a snowflake landed in the town square and did not melt. Candle Chapter 92. The Return to Ashlight. Kayla returned at last to the ash tree, now called Ashlight, where once her journey began. It had changed. Its bark was no longer gray, but silver blue, and its leaves whispered in dozens of tongues. Names fluttered in the wind like moths. There she met the last of the old gods, Thalen, the listener, who had watched from the edge of existence as memory and story wove the shape of the world. You bound the hollow, Thalen said. You fought the frostless king in silence. You returned memory to a broken world. But did I fix it?
Kayla asked. No.
You taught it how to begin again. The ash tree bowed, and from it fell 3 new seeds. Each glowed, not with magic, but with story. Plant these, said Thalen. 1 in snow, 1 in ash, 1 in flame. And then? Kayla asked. Then watch what the world becomes without forgetting itself. Snowcap Mountain Chapter 93. The story that writes itself. As Kayla journeyed north once more, seed in hand, a curious thing began to happen. Wherever she stepped, words appeared in the snow. Not carved, not drawn.
Written.
Her story, but not by her. It described her thoughts before she thought them. It wrote her fears, her regrets, her love. People began to follow, reading her footsteps like scripture. Some praised her. Others cursed her, for giving memory back to a world that had learned to live without it. But the story did not stop. It grew. It wrote itself, because the world had changed. Now the winter remembered, and it wanted to be heard. Books Chapter 94. The House of Pages. The journey led Kayla to the high cliffs of Lernvareth, where the wind cuts like truth and the rocks whisper lies. There, tucked into the side of the mountain, sat a structure as old as forgetting, a crooked tower made of book spines, scrolls, quills, and bones, known in hushed tones as the library that bled. It was not a place for the living. Books lined every surface, books that groaned when touched, that wept when opened. Ink dripped from ceilings like rain. The air was thick with the smell of wet parchment and iron. Kayla stepped inside. Each book whispered names, millions of them, forgotten, misremembered, changed. But one book called her directly. It sat alone, glowing faintly red. She opened it, and blood spilled out, not hers. You've begun the story, a voice whispered from the rafters. Now you must bleed to finish it. From the shadows came a figure, robed in tattered paper, eyes stitched shut, tongue inked with curses. The librarian of silence. Every great winter was written first, it said. This one was merely forgotten. You, child, have started to remember too much. Drop of Blood Chapter 95. The Bleeding of Names. The librarian moved like mist. It struck with quills sharpened to blades, hurling forgotten authors' words as weapons. Each scratch across Kayla's arms bled not red, but language, her own story spilling from her in curling scripts. You think memory heals? It hissed. Memory scars. Memory binds. Memory bleeds. Kayla stumbled, clutching her lantern. She was losing herself, her name fading with every drop of inked blood. And then she did what no one had ever done in the library. She read aloud. Not from a book, but from herself. My name is Kayla of the Ashlight Tree, she said, voice breaking. Daughter of frost, bearer of threads, rememberer of the old flame. The words solidified in the air, glowing white, then gold, then fire. The librarian screamed. Its own name, long buried, surfaced. Inarel, son of remembrance. With that, it vanished in smoke and ink. The library quaked, and a hidden door opened. Behind it, a heart. Not metaphorical. A literal heart, beating within the wall, bound in chains of paper and iron. Every pulse stripped a line of verse. The heart was the source, the first name forgotten, the seed of winter's cruelty. Kayla approached, hand trembling. Do not unchain it, said a voice behind her. Bust in Silhouette Chapter 96. The Daughters of Silence. 3 figures stepped into view, faces masked in frost silver, dressed in silks made of mute breath and shadow. They were the Daughters of Silence, sworn never to speak unless the world was on the brink of over-remembering, a fate they called the drowning. You cannot free the heart, the first one said. It remembers everything, even things the world chose to forget. Like the first hunger, whispered the second, or the betrayal that broke the moon. Or the name of death itself, finished the third. Kayla hesitated. She saw herself reflected in their silence, the temptation to bury grief, to silence pain, to preserve peace through forgetting. But she also knew every winter born from forgetting had been worse than the last. I will not unchain it, Kayla said, but I will speak to it. She knelt. She whispered her name. The heart pulsed, slower now, calmer. And in that moment, Kayla heard a voice not from her past, nor the world's, but from tomorrow. We are what we remember, it said, and what we are brave enough to forget with care. House with Garden, Chapter 97. The House Where Tomorrow Waits. The daughters said nothing as Kayla left. Outside, the storm had shifted. Not colder, not warmer, but listening. She followed the path north, where legends thinned and the sky bent low. There, at the edge of all maps, sat a quiet house made of stone, bone, and silver thread, with a door that always opened and a fire that never went out. It was called the House Where Tomorrow Waits. Inside sat an old woman stirring soup, a young man painting stars on the ceiling, a child reading stories aloud to a fire that flickered with memories. They looked up as Kayla entered. You're right on time, said the old woman. We've been waiting. What is this place?
Kayla asked.
This is the part of the story that hasn't been written yet, the child said. And only those who carry true winters in their bones can help shape it. Kayla stepped forward. The air smelled of lavender and snow. The fire whispered, and for the first time in a long time, Kayla smiled. Thread Chapter 98. The unraveling begins. It started with a whisper in the seams of the sky. Where once Kayla's threads had mended the world, binding truth, song, and name into a fragile braid, now something pulled against them. People forgot once more. Not in grief, nor healing, but violently. A child in the village of Alston woke without knowing her own mother. An elder in Dorne stopped speaking mid-prayer and never remembered why. Across the continent, monuments to the binding began to crack. The threads were snapping. Someone or something was unmaking the memory of winter itself. Kayla knew the signs. There is someone walking backward through my work, she whispered to the fire in the house where tomorrow waits. He is not walking, the old woman replied. He is cutting. And his name? They call him the Threadbreaker. Crossed Swords, Chapter 99. The Sword Made of Silence. In the marshes near the dead city of Finvale, Kayla tracked the first tear in the thread, a village where every inhabitant had forgotten how to speak. Not just language, but intention. They mimed hunger, but could not ask. They wept, but did not know why. At the center of the village stood a sculpture of ice. It was shaped like a blade. In its core was a single thread, red, frayed, and half-burned. It pulsed weakly, like a dying heartbeat. Kayla reached out and was thrown backward by a blast of memoryless wind. And then she saw him, a tall figure, cloaked in white so pale it hurt to look at. His face was veiled by frost and thread. In his hand was a blade that sang nothing, no story, no name, no song. The Sword of Silence. He said nothing, but she heard his thought. You have made a world that binds itself to pain. I have made a world that remembers, Kayla replied. Then let us unmake it, thread by thread.
And he vanished.
Chapter C. The Stone That Dreamed of Fire. Kayla needed counsel, so she sought the one thing older than winter, the stone that dreamed of fire. It lay deep beneath the glassen range, guarded by memories too large to live and too strong to die. As she descended the singing caves, echoes of her past footsteps returned out of order. She heard Lee's laugh before she was ever born. She heard her mother's voice ask, "Why did you leave me?" though she hadn't yet. At the chamber's heart, a stone burned. Not hot, not cold, but wanting. I come to ask how to defeat the Threadbreaker, Kayla said. The stone pulsed once. You do not defeat him, it replied. You become the part of the story he cannot cut. What part is that? The thread no one wove, the one that ties nothing together but still exists. Kayla frowned. That makes no sense. And yet, the stone said, "You understood it." DNA Chapter CI, the thread that refused to break. Kayla returned to the ashlight tree, now grown tall and strange. Its bark bore stories in 1,000 languages. But one branch, high brittle, new bore no tale at all. She climbed, higher than she had ever dared. And there, dangling alone in the wind, was a thread made of silence and hope. It had never been woven, never been believed, never even been seen. But it endured. Kayla plucked it. It sang no name. It hummed no truth. But it vibrated, in rhythm with the breath of every child not yet born. This was the thread of becoming. The one thing the threadbreaker could not destroy, for it had not yet happened. Snowflake Chapter CII, the battle without sound. It happened in the north, where snow never melted and the sky never cracked. Kayla faced the threadbreaker in the ruins of the Temple of Forgetting, a place where voices went to die. He raised his sword of silence. She raised the unwoven thread, and the air fell still. He struck. She bled memory.
She stepped.
He aged 1,000 years in her shadow. He whispered nothing. She sang a song not yet written, built from unborn stories and futures not yet dared. And the world paused, then broke, then mended. Not fully, not cleanly, but truly. The threadbreaker fell, not slain, but unmade by what had not yet been imagined. Candle Chapter CII, the candle that forgot its flame. After the fall of the threadbreaker, the world breathed. But only for a moment. A stillness crept in. Not silence, not peace, but absence. The next winter arrived like a ghost. Snow fell, but left no trace. Children were born, but none were named. Fires burned, but gave no warmth. Bells rang, but no one remembered why. And then, the worst of it, people forgot their own names. It began slowly. A merchant in Elton who could not sign a letter. A priestess in Kelmer who paused mid-prayer, searching for the syllables of self. Then whole towns, entire cities, where people looked at one another and only saw strangers. Kayla, still carrying the unwoven thread, felt it too. "The world is fraying again," she said to the lantern at her side. "But this time, it's not forgetting memory. It's forgetting identity." "No," said the lantern, flickering. "It's forgetting possibility." Open Book Chapter CIV, the book that read the reader. To understand the unraveling, Kayla journeyed to the Everscroll Vault, a place carved into glacier cliffs where every life, past, present, future, was recorded in ink that shimmered like oil. But when she arrived, she found the scrolls blank. Only one book remained. It was small, black, bound in a metal too light to name. And when Kayla touched it, the book opened itself. Words poured across the pages, not written by her hand, but from her soul. She walks in fear, but will not yield. She remembers too much, yet forgets her own joy. She wonders, if I vanish, will the world know it was me who held it together? Kayla trembled. This book did not record stories. It reflected them. The book that read the reader could only show what already lived inside, and the world's pages were now empty because no one remembered who they were. Cloud with Snow Chapter CV, the snow without footprints. Kayla wandered the snowfields of Voltaire, where no name had been spoken in a year. She passed silent villages where people moved like ghosts, blank-eyed, calling one another only by gestures. She left marks in the snow, but they vanished behind her. The world was becoming untrackable. One night, as the aurora flickered above, a child approached her. The child had no name, no voice, but in his hands he held a drawing, a crude picture of Kayla holding a lantern, facing a dark, twisted tree. "Is that me?" she asked. The boy nodded. "Where did you see this?" He pointed not forward but down, beneath the snow, beneath memory, to the place where winter buried its heart. Kayla understood. It was time to descend once more. Snowflake Chapter CVI, the birth of the winterborn child. At the base of the world, Where warmth had never reached, there was a cradle of ice. In it lay a child,
Sleeping.
unnamed, unshaped. But the snow curled around her protectively, and every snowflake that landed on her cheek whispered a potential name. Ilsa, Viral, Oshri, none. This child had never been born. And yet she was here. She was the Winterborn, forged from centuries of grief, memory, silence, and hope. A being made of untold stories and half-written names. Kayla reached for her. The child opened her eyes. They were mirrors. "Do you remember me?" the girl asked. Kayla knelt. "I think I dreamed you," she said softly. "No," the girl whispered. "I dreamed you. And now I'm waking up." Snow howled. The world cracked. And names began to return, not from memory, but from new beginnings. Musical notes, chapter CVI, The Echo Beneath the Ice. They said there was a place where music once lived, not played, not performed, but inhabited, like breath, or warmth, or sorrow. This place was called Nereth Hollow, a fissure beneath the frozen earth, so deep that sound could neither escape nor die. Here, centuries ago, the world had buried its lost songs, lullabies of dead mothers, hymns of faithless kings, war cries of forgotten armies. And now, the ice had begun to crack. Kayla stood at the edge of the hollow, the winterborn child at her side. The girl looked down into the abyss. "Do you hear that?" she asked. Kayla listened. At first, nothing. Then not sound, but a memory of sound, like the echo of a lullaby never sung. They descended, step by frozen step, into the choir's silence. Postal Horn Chapter CVI, The Songs That Refuse to Die. At the hollow's heart, they found them, not bodies, not bones, but echoes, clothed in frost, whispering notes from mouths sealed long ago.
Some wept as they sang.
Some shouted without pitch. Some merely hummed in loops, endlessly repeating the last moment they were remembered. Kayla stepped forward. The winterborn child reached out. "They need not be remembered to be heard," the girl said. She opened her mouth
And sang.
It was not a song of notes, but of possibility, a melody made of unborn verses and never-heard refrains. The echoes responded. They shifted, softened, reformed. Their songs became bridges, threads of sound linking one soul to another. Kayla added her own voice, a song of lantern light, of quiet courage, of walking alone but never without purpose. The hollow woke, and the world, far above, trembled as music returned to the bones of the earth. Candle Chapter CX, The Lantern That Spoke. That night, Kayla sat alone outside the hollow. Her lantern flickered beside her, as it always had. But tonight it spoke. "You have lit the dark for many," it said, "but the darkness in you has gone untended." Kayla did not respond. She was thinking of her mother's voice, now almost entirely gone. Of Lisa's laughter, of the way she used to hum while threading needles. "You fear losing yourself to the light you give," the lantern said. She nodded. "Then let me carry some of that light," it offered. Kayla hesitated, then opened the glass. A single breath from her soul drifted into the flame. It grew warmer, brighter. And now, when Kayla walked, the lantern whispered stories back to her, her own, retold gently, so she wouldn't forget. Input Latin Letters Chapter CX, The Name That Named Itself. Names returned slowly. Not from books. Not from memory.
But from the people themselves.
A boy in Vether named himself Rain after the sound of frost melting. An old woman in Rallon called herself Ruin Light, for she had lived through fire and song alike. A soldier without a past declared himself Thorn of Morning. The winterborn child, however, remained unnamed. She wandered among them, listening to names like flavors, like scents. Until one day, she stopped Kayla. "I have found mine," she said. "What is it?"
Somni.
"It means the dream that woke." Kayla smiled. "It suits you." "It is also yours in part," Somni said. "We share it, for I dreamed you, and you lit my way." They stood together as snow fell. But this time, It fell with warmth beneath it, as if the world, finally, was learning how to winter with memory intact. Crown Chapter CXI. The Throne of Thorns and Echoes. Far to the east, beyond the broken bridges of Haverreach and the frost-split plains of Estermere, stood a keep carved from obsidian and old grief, Caer Thorol. There sat King Medric the Last, crowned not by gold, but by memory. He bore no crown of metal. Instead, his crown was a circle of thin glass, always shifting, etched with moving images from every life he had touched, saved, or broken. Medric was not cursed. He had asked for this burden. "Let me remember," he had whispered once before the mirror tree. "Let me remember everything, so that no pain goes forgotten." The tree had granted his wish. Now he could not forget. Castle Chapter CXI. The Court of Endless Names. In Medric's court, servants whispered in silence, lest a misplaced word awaken a memory of war. Guests wept without knowing why, until the king explained. "You sat at my sister's wedding once. You smiled at her. She died in the fire. You gave bread to a child who became a tyrant. You laughed on a night when 10,000 froze in the north." Nothing escaped his grasp. Even Somni, when she visited with Kayla, felt the weight. "He doesn't wear memory," she whispered. "It wears him." Kayla agreed. The king welcomed them gently, but his eyes were cracked with knowing. "You are Kayla the Stitched," he said. "And you, Somni the Dreaming One. I have remembered you before I knew you. You must forget some of it," Kayla offered softly. "If I forget even one sorrow," Medric replied, "then it means it did not matter." And that he could not bear. Mantelpiece Clock Chapter CXII. The Memory Feast. Each year, on the longest night of winter's end, Medric hosted a feast of memory. No food was served. Instead, guests were given plates etched with memories of triumphs, failures, losses, kindnesses. They read them aloud, one by one, sharing each bite of remembrance like bitter bread. This year, Kayla and Somni were invited. Somni's plate bore no past. Only a single word: begin. Kayla's showed hundreds of moments, threads she had sewn, lives she had restored. But one memory shone brighter than the rest. A night when she chose to walk on alone, and no one followed. She almost set it down, but Medric stopped her. "Share it," he said, "or you'll carry it in silence forever." Kayla told the story. Not all guests understood, but all of them felt it, and something shifted in the room. Not release, not peace, but recognition. And that, at last, was enough. Tulip Chapter CXIV. The Shattering of Spring. The seasons turned, but spring did not come gently. It cracked the earth. Trees bloomed too fast, then died. Storms came in bursts. The sky changed colors with no warning. Birds migrated in circles, confused. Something was wrong. The world was held together by forgetting, Medric said. Now that all is remembered, it cannot move forward. Then it must shed, Somni replied. Kayla knew what that meant. A choice was coming. To keep memory, and with it, the pain that had frozen the world in place. Or to let it go, and risk forgetting the lessons of winter again. Neither path was clean. Neither path was safe. But both paths required hope. And so, the king made his final decree. He shattered his glass crown, and said, "Let memory choose its own weight."